Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that takes a look at the German Revolution that began with the Kiel Mutiny at the end of October 1918 and ended with the ratification of the Weimar Constitution in August 1919. What is a revolution? A successful attempt to force through a radical change in the way things are done. This can be in the workplace with the introduction of new technology, in society with equal rights movements, and in politics in the way we get our governments. And in this sense, that force may be a peaceful or a violent force. And in fact, the German Revolution had a bit of everything. Look at what happened. An emperor abdicated, and so Germany became a republic and a parliamentary democracy. There was mutiny and violence on the streets, but the key changes were brought about peacefully. A new constitution was written that, amongst other things, enshrined a wide range of rights, including the right for women to vote. But it began with mutiny. At the end of October 1918, German sailors in the Grand Fleet at the naval base of Wilhelmshaven mutinied. They had been ordered to sail and engage the British Navy in what Admiral Scheer saw as a last opportunity for an honourable battle. The sailors didn't see it that way, though. And on November the 3rd, they took their protest onto the streets of Kiel. Soon, workers' and soldiers' councils were established in Berlin and cities across Germany, from Hamburg to Munich. The German Revolution had begun. On the whole, at this point, it was a nationwide revolt rather than a revolution. But there were revolutionary outbursts, and the outcome for Germany, as we've already noted, was indeed revolutionary. With Germany on the point of defeat in World War I and order collapsing, the position of the Kaiser was in question. The communists had been openly calling for the Kaiser to abdicate, when on November the 6th, the leader of the Social Democrats, Friedrich Ebert, in order to reinstate a sense of order, reluctantly, Ebert was personally in favour of retaining the monarchy, but publicly called for him to abdicate. But the Kaiser refused. In Munich, a workers' and soldiers' council forced the King of Bavaria to abdicate. Remember, Germany was a federal state, still is, some of which at that point had their own kings or princes. And on November the 7th, Kurt Eisner declared a Bavarian Soviet Republic. And on November the 8th, Prince Max telephoned the Kaiser telling him that your abdication has become necessary to save Germany from civil war. The next day, Field Marshal Hindenburg and General Groener, who had taken over from Ludendorff after he had resigned, went to see the Kaiser to press on him that the army was collapsing, as was order at home, and that it was indeed all over. Hindenburg broke down. November the 9th was a momentous day. Prince Max, who had been made Chancellor by the Kaiser in October in an attempt to make Germany appear democratic, took it on himself to announce the Kaiser's abdication. The Kaiser finally accepted his fate, in fact a fait accompli, and on November the 10th went into exile in Holland. When Prince Max announced the Kaiser's abdication, he also resigned himself, handing the chancellorship to Ebert, as he was the leader of the Social Democrats, who were the largest party in the Reichstag that was elected before the war. Ebert formed a provisional government. He was a socialist, but he was also very much a Democrat, and he was determined to work with the Reichstag, as well as existing local governments, and too the civil service, the law courts, and the police, in order to rebuild a war-torn Germany on democratic principles. Ebert announced an amnesty for all political prisoners. Amongst those who had been amnestied were Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. He also announced the end of censorship, and he guaranteed freedom of opinion, all of which added to the public frenzy, if I can put it that way. But at the same time, on November the 9th, Karl Liebknecht proclaimed a socialist republic, and councils were being elected by workers and soldiers all over the country. On the evening of that very first day of the new republic, Ebert and General Grauner agreed to cooperate so as to ensure order. The army would be loyal to the provisional government and assist it in maintaining order, while the government promised it would not reform the army. In particular, it would respect the right of the army to maintain its own chain of command, and with respect to the extreme left, gave the army the freedom to act as it saw fit. Both men wanted to ensure that there would be no Bolshevik-like revolution in Berlin. The Ebert-Groener Pact proved controversial. It enabled Ebert's government to enforce order and to protect itself from revolutionary forces. But for many on the left, apart from being the main victims of the pact, they said it weakened the government by making it beholden to the military. Whilst at the same time, there were those in the army who were annoyed that they were now obliged to prop up the hated republic. That the government needed the pact should not be in doubt. The trouble was that neither the far left nor the far right had accepted what had happened. The far left sought a Bolshevik-like second revolution that would create a socialist republic, whereas the far right wanted to return to authoritarian government. As for the Social Democrats, desperately trying to save the democratic republic and stave off anarchy, they were caught between the two extremes. Meanwhile, the talks about the armistice terms had finished, and the German government announced their acceptance, though the terms were harsh. The war ended on November the 11th. In Berlin, the Spartacists, a group of communists who formed the Spartacus League, rose up against the government, hoping to bring about that Bolshevik-like revolution. They were led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who were amongst those political prisoners released by Ebert's amnesty. General Grauner responded to what had happened by calling for the Freikorps, volunteer militia units, to restore order in the capital. They were ex-soldiers, extreme nationalists. They hated the left in general and Bolshevism in particular. They were also against the democratic system set up by the German Revolution. Most of them wanted the return of the Kaiser. They also sought to undo the humiliation of Germany's defeat. Many even refused to accept Germany's defeat, and if it had been defeated, then it was the fault of the November criminals. Impartial balanced, respectful of others' opinions, they were not. But they were heavily armed, and they were a disciplined force. And in January 1919, they brutally repressed the uprising, murdering Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht in the process. They did the same thing with the Second Bavarian Soviet Republic in May 1919. Meanwhile, elections for a Constituent Assembly were held on January the 19th, 1919, with state elections held at the same time, and with women voting in both for the first time. It would govern Germany and write a new constitution, after which new elections would be held. The new constitution was duly written. It looked to be the most liberal and democratic constitution ever written. It passed on July the 31st, 1919, and was ratified on August the 11th, heralding the end of the German Revolution. Details, as always, can be found in my ebooks if you're interested. I promise you, events and their significance are fully explained. But for this presentation, it only remains for me to thank you for listening. Before I go, though, let me tell you about my podcast. It's called Making Sense of This Crazy World. And as I say each week in introducing an episode, my aim is to use history to help explain the crazy world we live in today. It's been running for a little over a year now, so there are plenty of mini-series that might pique your interest. Check it out if you're not approaching the dreaded exam season. If you're interested in history, you should find the podcast interesting. But that's it for me for now. Cheers.